Today, we're talking finance. We're looking mainly at sponsorship and grant funding, but I am going to talk a little bit about event finance in general at the beginning. So just bear with me. It's some important content and stuff that a lot of events need to be very mindful of before they actually start this process of sponsorship and grant funding. So this is our third session. As always, we are recording the sessions. So if at any point anyone has to duck out or you want to share this with any other members of your team, it will be available this afternoon. I'll send a copy of the recording to Kim and she'll make sure that's made available to everybody. My understanding is they're being loaded onto a website and then everybody will have access to those. Whoops. So you can see now this will be our halfway point. So we do still have 3 more sessions. We'll look next week at risk, safety and security. Then we look at succession planning, and part of that's looking at how to set up a really robust team for your event. And the final one will be looking at events in a COVID world, and we'll look a bit at COVID safe planning, etc. As part of that session. So if there's any questions or comments throughout the session, as always, I will have moments where we'll stop and have discussion. But if there's anything in between that, please feel free to use the chat box just to raise any points. Now, I'm assuming everybody can see my screen. Just make sure I've got that on. Wonderful. Great. So everybody's aware of who I am, Linda Tillman from rEVENTS Academy, and you can check us out online if you want to understand a bit more about what we do. Before we start, does anyone have any questions or points that they would like to discuss from last week's session? Does anybody have any insight into who their ideal event attendees are, which was a big focus of our session last week? You'll recall we looked at event marketing, but spent quite a bit of time looking at ideal event attendees and getting that understanding and the appreciation of knowing who your ideal event attendees are. Okay, that suggests to me that everybody's ticking along fine. Okay, so today what we're going to look at, as I said, the focus of the session will be on sponsorship and grant funding. However, we're also going to have a look at this whole idea of what is your financial drive. We're going to look at tips on how to become self-sustainable, and we're also going to look at how to successfully manage your budget. So we're going to touch a bit probably for the first 40 minutes or so on finances in general, and then we're going to spend the other 3/4 of our session on event sponsorship and also looking at grant funding opportunities, because there are some current grants that are available at the moment for events in regional Australia and also Queensland. All right. Now, I'm interested to know, so if you wanted to pop it in the chat box or feel free to take yourself off mute to respond to these points. I'm keen to get an understanding of how dependent your event is on sponsorship funding. And what are your key revenue streams for your event? If anyone's prepared to share or drop that in the chat box. And the reason I ask this question is that sponsorship should only be one of your revenue streams. And in an ideal world, it should be less than 20% of your revenue. Now, I know that's not the case for a lot of events, but that is something that events should be striving for. And I think what we're going to see as we're coming out of the COVID situation we're currently in is that those events that are more dependent on corporate sponsorship, are potentially going to have a tougher time. Victoria has raised her hand. Please jump in. Feel free to unmute yourself, or you're welcome to also pop it in the chat box.
Hi, Linda.
How are you?
Good, and everyone else. Thank you. I think this is a really great session. I find a lot of our community groups are highly dependent on sponsorship. And when you refer to sponsorship, do you refer to local donations seeking from businesses as well? Is that
Absolutely.
part of the sponsorship?
Yep. Any third party funding from business or corporates, I would put into the sponsorship category.
Okay, because yes, from my observations and from assisting with events, I find that a lot of our events in my community are very dependent on sponsorship. Some of the events I have been a part with, other revenue streams has been personalised merchandise like singlets or t-shirts or caps. But if you're dependent on getting sponsorship, it's a bit hard to get those sort of items on a tight budget.
Yeah, absolutely, Victoria. This is a very common situation, you know, where events are very dependent on sponsorship. And I think we've got to this point, we're our own worst enemy in some cases, but we have got to this point where we have created that dependence. You know, it's certainly, and I'm going to talk about this, I'm not by any means suggesting sponsorship is not a good thing. Like I said, it's definitely one of your revenue streams, and for most events, it's a really key revenue stream, but we need to move away from that dependence on it. You know, and you see, if I talk through this session, what I mean by that. And it's somewhat changing a bit of mindset where even community events need to think about how they are financially managed. You know, it's not just, oh, well, we're a community event, so we can't charge an entry fee, or we're not about generating revenue. There's all varying levels of that, right? So it's about how you're creating viability for the future of your event.
I agree with you, and I think that's a strong mentality of, because we are a community event, we have to keep costs low and we have to try to subsidise the costing of this so it's free. Talking to a lot of the people, like a lot of the mature members of the community, they would do raffles, or someone would auction a bale of wool and that would go towards the event, you know, from the property, or someone might donate a beast and that would be auctioned off and that would go towards the event. So I see a lot of that happening in the past, and I sort of wonder that we have we become so reliant on seeking other sponsorship that we don't communicate and actually ask more people around our community to help sponsor a community event, because that's who it's for. So yeah, I sort of hear about what they used to do and I see what we're doing now, and maybe there's an overlapping that we need to bring back.
And I think it's a bit of time too. You know, everybody is so busy. I think sponsorship is seen, because it's definitely not easy, but it is seen as an easy option from a financial perspective, rather than, you know, generating your own revenue.
Oh, definitely. And I think also from a community point of view, there's so many who are on the same committee, and that just tires so many people out. And if it's, like, you know, easier to go and get sponsorship, it's one less raffle that they have to put together, or one less lot of cakes they've got to go and sell, or so that's just my point of view.
Yeah, thank you. And a few people have shared some comments in the chat box, which is wonderful. And they're all, it's great to hear. I mean, some are not dependent on sponsorship. You know, they've got product to sell, some rely on sponsorship, but there's other revenue streams, and that's all absolutely fine. It's just this dependence on sponsorship. Have a think about this question for a moment. And if you'd like to comment in the chat box with any thoughts on that, please do. But this is this whole thing. And like I said just before, even community events need to understand this. What is the financial drive of your event? And what do I actually mean by that? It's not just about, you know, generating profit or being, you know, commercially driven by any means. It's about financial viability. In order to be able to continue to deliver your event into the future, you need to actually be able to cover costs. So, you know, the cost of running an event is not going to go away, unfortunately. If anything, it will continue to rise. So it's really important for us to understand our financial drive and what that is in order to be able to remain viable in the future. So that's about knowing what your targets are. So, you know, you may be an event that is commercially driven. So for you, it is about profit. What's that profit margin you want to attract each year? What are you striving for? Maybe it's just to break even. Maybe that's your financial drive. You know, maybe it's about raising a certain amount of funds to actually go to support another charity or another community organisation or group. And I actually worked with an event in Northern Territory that's run by combined Rotary clubs. So their financial drive for their event, so they have a major tourism festival, and the major drive for those clubs in running that event is to actually raise funds to support other Rotary initiatives in their local community. So that's their financial drive. It's to raise funds. And they even had a financial target, which they put in their budget. So they would say, you know, our charities for this year, we want to raise, say, $10,000. So they put that as an expense line in their budget so that they knew that that was their target. So they're very clear in terms of what their financial drive is. And then I worked with another event in Queensland, and their financial drive was to raise enough funds over a 3-year period to be able to build a new community hall in their rural community. So do you understand what I mean? You've got to understand what is your financial drive. And that could be, like I said before, that could be simply just to break even so that the event can continue. You don't have any real financial aspirations around raising funds for a charity or making profit or giving back to a community group. It could simply just be breaking even, but you need to understand what that is, because that sets the whole tone for your budget, for your sponsorship, for your grant funding that you're chasing. Now, setting your event budget. This is a really important process that events need to go through. And it's not just a matter of sitting down and saying, you know, we've got $5,000 for our event this year. You really need to think about the financial management of your event in order to get the best outcomes. And I love this little cartoon. Why bother to budget? So we can worry before we spend the money, as well as after we spend the money. It's kind of what budgeting does, right? It makes you just a little bit anxious about things, but in a good way, because it's really important for us to understand how we're sitting from a financial perspective. And obviously, the bigger your event and the more expenses involved in your event, then the more extensive your budget's going to be. So once again, this is all about scale, but in principle, no matter how big or small your event is, it's so important to have a budget and good financial management practices in place. So when you're setting your budget, and setting your budget should be the first thing you do in the planning process for your event. So when you're sitting down to start the process in planning your event, there's a few key things you do. One is setting the budget, another one is getting your team structure in place, and another one is setting your planning timeline. So what are our milestones? What are our key dates? And what's our action plan in achieving those? So your budget is a really key planning tool for your event. So what you need to do is that you need to work really collectively with your committee. You need to set the budget and you need to agree on the risk appetite of your committee. What that means is understanding how much risk your committee is prepared to take within the budget. And once you start playing around with a budget, you'll get a sense of what that is. So, for example, does the committee want to take the risk of spending more money on a headline act. So they might go, you know what, let's get somebody, you know, international to come to our event as a strategy to increase ticket sales. Are they prepared to take that risk, or do they want to be a little bit more, I was going to say responsible, but a little safer, and maybe go with a local act that they've had in previous years? So how much risk is the committee prepared to take? Don't forget that as a committee or a committee member, you're accountable for the finances of your event. So it is a big responsibility. The other thing you need to think of with your budget is having a really good finance coordinator or a treasurer to manage the budget. And that's their only job with the event. So they will do regular reporting and reconciling and make sure that everything's up to date and everybody is aware of how the event budget is tracking. I've worked with many events that will set a budget. So they're really good at setting the budget at this stage of the planning process, but then they don't actually look at any of the actuals until after the event, which is quite scary because the idea of a budget is a planning tool. So you should be reporting regularly and having a look at how your actuals are tracking compared to what you've budgeted to spend. And also how much income's coming in as compared to how much income you had forecasted. So you need to be doing that so that you can adapt and adjust accordingly so that you end up in a positive financial situation at the end. I often get asked this question of income or expenses first when you're looking at an event budget. And I always suggest that you set the expenses first. So I always say, think about the type of event you want to put on. And that's, as we know, based on demand and feedback. So, you know, what's the ideal event program and the type of event that you want to put on? And what are the expenses that are required to do that? Then that's the ideal world, right? And we'd wish that we could go, yeah, let's do that. But then what you need to do is then start looking at the revenue that needs to be generated to make that work. And then we have to start trimming most of the time. So setting the budget isn't just a really quick process. It is a bit of a process of scenario planning. So you're looking at different options. Can we afford to do that? Oh, well, here's our revenue. No, we can't. We need to put money into this year. So setting the expenses of your event first, then looking at the income to match that. And then you're going to just have to play around to get that to balance out. Now, there should always be, as I was saying before, this whole idea of monitoring and reviewing the budget. I always recommend to events that there is a finance report at your committee meetings. So always making sure, even if you're not the finance coordinator or the treasurer, it's still important for everybody to be aware of where the budget's up to. So it's this process of monitoring the budget, reviewing the budget, and adjusting it as you need to. Never ignore budgeting issues and leave them until the event's over. Because it's only those little things. So it might be, you know, $50 here or $10 here or $100 here that's been overspent on different items. And it's all of those things that add up at the end. So keeping a close eye on how things are tracking in terms of actual spend and actual income is a really important process to get into the habit of. And as I said, your budget is one of your key planning tools. So make sure you use it as a planning tool. All right, I want to just take a quick look at revenue streams. So as I said at the start, sponsorship and grant funding have a role in terms of the financial management of an event or the financial contribution to an event. However, it's only should only be one small component of your revenue streams for your event. Have a look at that blue bubble, and I want you to think about that. Have you ever considered that? Could you still run your event successfully if you removed income and grants if you remove grants and sponsorship from your budget? What would that look like? And I always set that challenge to events because it's important to actually start looking at your event in terms of your owned revenue streams. So they're revenue streams that you generate yourself, that you own, so nobody can take them away from you, because grants and sponsorship, at any point you can lose those. And we know it's hard work to secure them. And it's often a bit of effort to maintain them. So imagine if you had your own revenue streams and didn't have that reliance on grants and sponsorship. So just think about that. And maybe that's a little exercise for you to consider after this, is taking a look at your budget and seeing how would you replace those revenue streams. So festivals do need to have an income generation strategy. And like I was saying before, even if you are a community event, you need to understand what your income generation strategy is. So how are you generating income or revenue for your event? And that obviously is linked back to your financial drive. So that's going to give you a sense of your target financially. Is it break even? Is it $10,000 in donation to a charity? You know, is it a $50,000 profit to go back to a commercial investor? You need to determine that. And that's going to also be linked to your, your income generation strategy. Can you survive without grants or sponsorship? Like I said before, set yourself a bit of a challenge and see if you can actually find new revenue streams to replace grants and sponsorship. I always say to events, grants and sponsorship should be a bonus. So start to think of it as a bonus. You shouldn't be dependent on it to actually deliver or cover the running costs of an event. I also encourage you to think outside the box to create year-round revenue streams. So what do I mean by year-round revenue streams? So I'm talking there about revenue streams that you can actually, that can create for you revenue throughout the year, not just when the event is on. And I'll give you an example of that. An event I've worked with in the past, what they did, which was, I just love this, it's so smart. They purchased a marquee. So they got a grant, it was a state government grant. They purchased a marquee that they could actually use for their corporate events, for their corporate groups and their sponsorship area at their event. So they would normally have to pay, I think it was around, it was $20,000 to $30,000 that they had to pay for all this marquee and setup because they were in a remote area. So a big investment for them to actually just hire it for their event. So that's a big expense item in their budget. So what they did is they got an infrastructure grant. They purchased their own marquee to use at their event. So straight away, they're saving that expense line item in their budget, which is massive. Now what they do, because they're in a more remote area and all other events, you know, races, race days and, you know, different corporate groups, etc., often need marquees as well, they now hire out their marquee year round. So that's generating over $30,000 a year in revenue for that event, in addition to actually cutting, it was like I'm sorry, I don't know the exact figure, but it was over $20,000, the expense of actually hiring the marquee and everything that they needed at their event every single year. So are there ways that you can think outside the box to create year-round revenue streams for your event? And things that are easy, because we don't want to actually create more work. Merchandising your event. So excellent way to raise funds if that is appropriate to your event. Not every event is appropriate for merchandising, but what you can also do is look at securing brand partners. So a classic example of that is the Deniliquin Ute Muster down in southern New South Wales. They have a partnership that it used to be with RM Williams, but I believe it's now with RB Sellers, or it could be with Ringers Western Wear. Anyway, one of those types of brands, they actually have a co-branded merchandise partnership with them. So they have a big, broad range of merchandise, and you can have a look at that on their website, the Deniliquin Ute Muster. And they actually have a partnership arrangement. So all of their merchandise is co-branded with, let's say, RB Sellers and Deniliquin Ute Muster. They get that merchandise at a heavily reduced price because that brand, RB Sellers, is getting massive brand exposure through the event, and they sell it at a premium price. So it's a really good way for them to raise revenue by doing that brand partnership. Obviously, another ticketing option for events is to become ticketed. If you are currently a non-ticketed event and you've been operating for a number of years, you need to be really cautious making that transition from a non-ticketed to a ticketed event. I'm not saying don't do it. I think it's really smart. I think we definitely need to be looking at that user pay system. It's really the way of making our events viable. But if you've been a free event for a number of years, you need to just take that, make that transition to a ticketed event a very cautious process, because there's some examples that I've experienced where that has had massive backlash from community and from the audience that attends that event because it hasn't been managed or communicated well. So just be mindful. A lot of events do it, but you need to manage it extremely well. So what are some revenue streams? Look, if you've got any other revenue streams that aren't on the screen at the moment, please pop it into the chat box, because I find it very interesting to hear from other events in terms of the types of revenue streams that they actually have. Ticket sales, that's a no-brainer, but not all events are structured to charge an entry fee. But if you can, it certainly can become a big revenue stream. But if you aren't structured to charge an entry fee, there's also often option for events to have components of their event ticketed. So it might not be just one ticketing structure over your event. It may actually be that you identify some particular areas of your event that are a bit more of a premium experience that lend themselves well to being ticketed, and you may ticket those elements of your event. Other revenue streams, as we've said, merchandise, food and bev sales is always a good one. I see a couple of people mention that in the chat box as a revenue stream. And it doesn't just have to be like one canteen or one bar. Think about how you can have multiple food and beverage outlets. So, for example, you might go, we've got just a water store. All that does is sell bottled water, which is not really good for the environment, but I'm sure there's other ways to do it. But it's just a water stall. You might have, a coffee stall that's just coffee and some, cakes or something like that. So thinking about not just having that typical kind of canteen and a bar, but how can you actually break it down and have things that are a little bit more, I guess, specific and a bit more maybe premium in quality that can be charged at a higher, costed out at a higher price. You can sell advertising in your program, trade and market stores, so getting the site fees, and that can be a big earner, but don't fall into the trap of letting that take over your event because it is a earner. Too many festivals are becoming kind of the same. So I encourage events, when you're looking at market stores or food stores or trade stores, is that you be selective and aim for quality over quantity. Fundraising initiatives, so can you hold a stall or raffles, etc. at other events? Advertising on your own website or social channels. VIP events, so similar to what I was saying before in terms of ticketing a component of your event, that could become a VIP, an exclusive VIP event. Behind the scenes, we've got 50 tickets for people to actually go behind the scenes and meet some of the entertainers. And you charge a premium price for that. Also things like commission on third-party stallholder sales. And some events do that. It can be a little bit messy to manage, but it's certainly something to consider. Okay, I'm going to just jump into the chat box. I'd be interested to know if anyone else has any other revenue streams other than what I've mentioned, or is there anything from what I mentioned that has kind of sparked a bit of thinking for your event in terms of what you could add as a revenue stream? If anyone has any comments or thoughts, I'll leave it open for a couple of minutes. So we're going to move on to sponsorship now. What I'm going to share with you is it's the process that I go through with my clients in terms of identifying who are our ideal sponsors, prospective sponsors, and the process we go through to secure those sponsors. Sponsorship is a really hard slog. And I'm sure everybody would agree it's tough to get knocked back often from prospective sponsors. It's disheartening, it's draining, it's yucky. So what we want to try to do is to have a better process so we have a better chance of success with our sponsorship pitching. We want less knockbacks, ultimately. So as I said, sponsorship should only be about 20% of your revenue. And what you need to be doing is thinking about all of those alternative revenue streams. So what we've just talked about is trying to just get you in the mindset of, we don't just want to dive straight into sponsorship and grant funding for our event. We want to be looking at it more holistically from a financial perspective to go, this is our financial drive, this is our budget. Now, these are the sponsorship and grant opportunities that we're going to go for to fill any gaps in our budget. And that's the first thing we do with sponsorship, is to set our target. We need to be really smart and understand what we need. A lot of events will go out with a bit of a blanket approach, just saying, sponsor our event. We've got a gold, silver and bronze package. Please sponsor our event. But do they really know what they need as part of their sponsorship strategy? So what you need to do initially is to start setting your targets. And you're already a step ahead. As we've just talked about, you've got your budget. So once you've got your budget, you can identify your cash sponsor target. So basically that is, once you've got all your income, all your expenses, you'll then have a gap. So if you're like me, your gap's going to be pretty big because you want this amazing top of the range event, but your income and revenue can't quite match that. So there you've got a gap. So my event expenses might be 100,000. The revenue forecast that I'm getting, which is always got to be realistic, is sitting at about 75,000. So I know there's a $25,000 gap there. So I need to generate that through cash sponsorship in order to ensure that my event at least breaks even. So you need to be able to identify What is that gap between income and expenses that I can offset through corporate sponsorship? You also should look at your budget and really critically review your expenses. You know how you go for sponsorship and people will often say, oh, I can donate, you know, a bag of feed, or I'll donate some fuel vouchers, I'll donate some accommodation vouchers. And you end up with all of these in-kind donations at your event. And you're like, what will we do with these? Oh, we'll do a raffle, or we'll give them away, or whatever. Sometimes they become more effort than they're actually worth. So what you need to do is to make sure you can identify those expense items in your budget that can be offset through in-kind sponsorship or donations. So what I always suggest is focus on in-kind donations that are budget relieving. So if I've got an expense item in my budget that is, you know, graphic design, for example. So it could be graphic design of, you know, our website, our poster, and our flyer. You might have designed some content for your social media channels. So graphic design is an expense. That expense might be $500, for example. So you might then go, okay, if we can remove that $500 by getting a sponsor, a local graphic designer or a graphic designer that we know to actually provide that service in kind in return for a sponsorship package, then that is budget relieving. It's taking $500 out of your expenses. That's, to me, that's as good as cash. So that's what you want to be aiming for. You want cash, or you want budget relieving in kind sponsorship. Now, the third thing you want to consider when you're looking at targets is you need to consider what new projects or initiatives do you need cash for. You may want to add a new element to the program. You might want to build a new toilet block at the showground. You may need a new stage. There may be some, you know, goals or aspirations for growth and development that you know you're not going to be able to cover the cost from the event budget, but that's an extra project or initiative. And if you can secure some extra sponsorship funds to go towards that, then that's fantastic. So as you can see, taking the time to set your budget is really important to understand what you need. So you should then be in a position to go, okay, we know we need $25,000 cash, and we want to secure in-kind sponsorship to cover graphic design, printing, media, and fencing for our site. So straight away, you know. So you're not going to waste time going out there recruiting sponsors for anything, because it is so time consuming. I worked on an event last year, given it was an international sporting event, but I spent easy 12 months negotiating with a couple of corporate sponsors, and one of those still didn't come through in the end. So my point is, it's very time consuming, the negotiation process, going backwards and forwards, and then even managing the sponsors is really time consuming. So you only want to secure or chase what you need. So understand what those targets are. The next thing you really need to understand is what you have to offer sponsors. Have a think about it. Do you really understand what you have to offer sponsors? Many events do just whack together a series of packages. The classic is the gold, silver, bronze packages. And typically what they will do is they'll send it out far and wide. They'll cross their fingers. They'll pray every night that somebody comes back and says, yeah, we'd love to sponsor your event. And that's rarely successful. Absolutely, it may get some hits, and it often generates a lot of in-kind donations. But you need to ask, are they the valuable hits that you want? If you end up with a whole heap of in-kind donations, often what that means is you end up with a heap of corporate sponsors that have given an in-kind donation but have a high expectation, and they become they become really demanding on your time. So can you see where I'm going? It's understanding what you want and only getting what you want, so that you don't burden yourself in managing sponsors that are only giving an in-kind donation. So you need to understand what your event can offer a prospective sponsor. And you can only understand that if you take the time to analyse your assets of your event. So I just want to step you through this process quickly. Happy to take any questions, but this is a basic process that I go through with events to get clear on what they actually have to offer sponsors, because this is a partnership, right? You're not just going to sponsors to say, can we have $5,000, please? Thank you very much. It's a partnership. So you really need to understand what you have to give back for that $5,000. Why would they give you that $5,000? What's the transaction? So first thing you need to do, and you guys should be experts in this now because we spent a session on this last week. You have to know who your event attendees are. Sponsors will want to know how or who they are and how they can engage with them. Basically, what your event is a marketing channel for the sponsor. So they want to know that your attendees at your event are the ideal market for that sponsor to build awareness, conversion for their business. So this is where building that complete picture of your attendees is really helpful. And that's that process we went through last week, was looking at your ideal event attendees. So if you've created those profiles, that becomes a really rich piece of information for you to use when you're pitching to sponsors. And also for you when you're analysing who your preferred sponsors could be, because you want to have the same ideal markets. The second step you need to take is you need to brainstorm what your event assets are. Essentially, all that is a list of things that you can sell. And we're going to look at some examples shortly. But what you need to do is you need to bring your committee together and brainstorm everything that they think you could be selling through your event. Just brainstorm everything. And essentially what you're going to do is you're going to come up with a list of all of these things that you can sell to a sponsor. You can look at your competition and see what they're offering sponsors. It's good to do a bit of research, and I'm not by any means suggesting go out and copy what your competitors are doing from a sponsorship perspective, but look at other competing events or other events that are similar to yours and see what they're offering. You can often search and find sponsorship proposals online and just get some idea of what others are offering. So you want to come up, and this is a process of getting all of the assets, just a brainstorm. Nothing is a silly option here. Once you've done that, you'll end up with this massive list of assets, and that is what will form an inventory list. And that becomes a key part of your sponsorship proposal. Once you've got an inventory list, rather than creating a single generic sponsorship package and sending it out to everyone you know and their dog, you can start looking really closely at building an inventory of everything you are willing to sell. So you can start to be really targeted. Now, the final step is to then start looking at what you would charge for everything in your inventory list. This is not easy, and you may not be able to do it for everything. But what you want to try to do is put value on your assets, because that's going to help you put a price on your sponsorship package. So you'll look at things like product placement or free tickets or market store space, and you'll give all of those different things of value. Advertising in your program, promotion on your website. You're going to put a value beside each of those. And as I said, it's not easy, particularly things like logo placement on your website. So when you put a sponsor's logo on your website, how do you put a value on that? Well, what you can do is you can actually compare it with the cost of them doing their own Google AdWords. And it just gives you an idea. So you're not trying to come up with an absolute figure here. It's just an idea of the value of these assets. And you're not going to share this information with any sponsorship prospects. It's your planning process to be able to then go, okay, if we're going to pitch to XYZ a sponsorship package that includes logo placement, speaking opportunities, free tickets, exhibition space, blah, 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 then you know, based on the value you've placed against those things, roughly what value that is. So you can go, okay, that sponsorship package is worth $1,000. You see what I'm doing? Like, this is about, you need to understand before you can start pitching, before you can even start considering who your potential sponsors are, is understanding what you have to sell your sponsors. It's this process of, really understanding what you've got to offer. And once you've done this once, so I don't want you to feel overwhelmed and think, oh my God, this is making sponsorship so complicated. It may appear complicated, but you know what? It will save you hours of time through the sponsorship pitching process. Because what you're doing is you're cutting down on the potential of going to a whole heap of sponsors that aren't even interested or relevant or appropriate. So trust me, I've been through this many, many times. I've done it the wrong way and I've done it this way. And I know that this saves a lot of time. And once again, if your event's much smaller, then this process isn't going to take you as long. But you need to understand what it is that you have to offer sponsors. So you do this and you've got that then. You don't have to do it every year. If your event changes slightly, you might add some new things to your inventory list. You might be able to come up with a new package. But once you've been through this process and know what your assets are, you can just draw on that each year to create your sponsorship packages. Now, here are some things that you may want to consider. So when you're looking at that inventory list, so what are the assets of your event? I just wanted to give some examples because sometimes that confuses people. The terminology can confuse people a little bit. But if you have any others that perhaps aren't listed here, I'd love you to pop it into the chat box. So, naming rights. This is an obvious one. It can be for your entire event or it can be for elements of your event. So events might have a naming rights sponsor of their stage. So if you've got a main stage where all of the entertainment is taking place, it might be, the rEVENTS Academy main stage. And we pay a fee in order to get the return for that sponsorship package. So naming rights. The other thing to just be mindful of with that is that many sponsors will look for category exclusivity. What I mean by that is if you approach a bank, for example, they may want to be the only bank sponsoring your event. Actually, they will want to be the only bank. So just be mindful of that as well when you start to look at your hit list, which we're going to talk about shortly. Don't go and approach 5 local banks at the same time. Maybe approach one that you think is the best fit. If you're unsuccessful with that, then go to the next one, because majority of the time, those different industries will want to have exclusive sponsorship rights to the event. Okay, some other assets are things like access to your mailing or distribution list. I won't go through them all, you can see them all there. If you've got any questions about any of those, please don't hesitate to yell out or pop something in the chat box. You know, adverts in your official program, so that's quite popular. Co-branded merchandise, and I was talking about that before in terms of Daniliq and Newtmuster as the example. I see that working more and more these days and is a really good strategy. Your volunteers are also an asset. And a lot of people don't think of this, but you know, your volunteers are walking around at the event for that whole event duration. So for a sponsor to actually provide uniforms or even at least shirts for your volunteers, so they all look the same, it can have volunteer written large on the back and then their branding on it, that's a real asset for them to have all of these brand ambassadors essentially walking around the event for them. So really think about what are all of our assets. Speaking opportunities, you've got a lot of space. Well, depending on your event, you've got space. You have a stage, you have a slot in your program for people to speak. There's all of these things are assets that can go on your inventory list. Even think about your marketing in the lead up to the event. If you're investing in TV advertising, there's an asset, right? A sponsor might be interested if they know that they can get exposure through your TV campaign. So it's really about thinking, what are all of the assets or things that we could sell a sponsor or that a sponsor would find valuable. All right, before we move on to the next step, which is about identifying your prospective sponsors, or how I like to call it, finding your perfect match. Does anyone want to comment on their own assets? Has anyone got any questions on that? Assets or inventory lists? Everyone's very quiet today. Busily taking notes or enjoying lunch.
Linda, so with our events assets, sort of we try to get someone to, say, sponsor the fireworks. This year, I've looked at and directed to a few people, like our rodeo, they're going to sponsor shoots and also the different events. That's never happened before. So that's a different one we've taken on this year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you would have lots of different elements. I mean, you would have so many assets,
yeah,
you know, in terms of the events that you're running, the site, you know, signage space.
Yeah.
Even the announcements, you know, you've also got the audio announcements that are happening throughout the night or the day or the event. There's loads of assets there.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's breaking it down. If it's an event like yours, for example, it's also about breaking down the different events within the event and thinking about those. And sometimes you've got to be a little bit smart in thinking, okay, am I better to break down elements within this event? So if you take the rodeo, for example, do we sell the shoots? Do we sell off also naming rights to each of the categories? Or do we just get one big sponsor to be the sponsor of the rodeo? And they have exclusive, but they've got to pay a premium. The challenge with that is it'll be really interesting to see what the sponsorship appetite or environment is like post-COVID. You know, there's some suggestion that it might be a little bit harder for events to get sponsorship. I mean, no one really knows. Everyone's kind of making assumptions, but considering some industries and some states have been through a really rough time, it could be a little bit more challenging to secure sponsorship. So with that in mind, what I've been telling events is you might just need to lower the value of your sponsorship, and maybe it's about getting more smaller sponsors rather than a few big sponsors, which is not always ideal because it then becomes harder to manage. But that's a little bit of an unknown at this stage, but it's still something for us to keep in mind.
I just know I've just targeted or asked a few people with the rodeo that are in that field, like, or associated with other rodeos, would they like to put sponsorship on an event? And they've all jumped at it and said, yep, we'll donate the prize money. Tell me how much you want and we'll either do one event or two events. And I went, oh, righto. Like, it was general conversation. It wasn't actually a proper proposal. It was just general conversation.
Yeah.
And trying to gauge people's ideas, whether this would work or not, was my thing. And they've all jumped on board and said, yep, no, we're happy to do it. Just tell us our value and we're right to go, which surprised me.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's an excellent position to be in. You just need to, you know, in that case, and it sounds like you're doing all the right things, but making sure, if they're so keen, that you're getting exactly what you need. You know, like I was saying before, you don't want to have a whole heap of sponsors that you've got to manage that aren't actually filling your needs. So yeah, knowing, okay, this is exactly what we need. And like you said, prize money, that once again, that's a budget relieving item, because if they don't cover that cost, then you've got to cover that cost out of the budget, right? So that's as good as cash to me. You know, those kind of sponsorship arrangements.
Yeah.
Victoria, I think I just seen your hand up. Yeah.
Linda, I want to ask about social media value. So while we put our sponsors' logos and details on the flyers and on the brochures and we announce it all day, in your professional opinion, how do we value add for our sponsors on social media? Should we be acknowledging them once a week, 3 weeks before the event? Should we be acknowledging them 3 times a week? Should we be asking for promo? Like, how do we handle that value on social media?
Yeah, good, very good question. And this needs to be managed well, not just for your sponsors, but what you've also got to remember is the purpose of social media. What you can do is really sour or damage the audience. So if you, and you would have, I'm sure you would have seen this, where events, you know, they're a month out from their event and all of a sudden on their social media, you see all of these posts about different sponsors. That's not necessarily the purpose of social media. It's not about, you know, just spamming almost your audience with a whole heap of posts to promote your sponsors. And it doesn't really achieve what the sponsors could gain from social media. So you need to think that through. You need to think through the plan. So what, and what I would typically suggest in that case, and this does vary depending on the type of event, who your audience is on social media, but you need to first of all have the conversation with your sponsors. So what is it that they'd like to gain from your social media channels? You know, do they want to try to get some people over to their Facebook page? Do they want to try to encourage people to subscribe to a newsletter? Is there a particular product or service that's related to your event that perhaps they're going to be at your event demonstrating or showcasing that could be promoted on your Facebook page? So I would first of all have that conversation with the actual sponsor to get a sense of what it is they'd like to really achieve from any social media promotion that you do for that sponsor. So first of all, finding out that. The second thing you need to do is always, when you do a social media post about a sponsor, you should always have your audience in mind. Try not to be just sales focused. So, you know, those posts that are like, oh, we're so proud to have RM Williams sponsoring our event, you know, and there's a logo of RM Williams. It doesn't really achieve anything for the sponsor, and it doesn't give any value to your audience either. So always think about your audience. So what is it that they want? Could the post be a little bit educational? Could the post actually be, you know, making the audience aware that RM Williams is going to have their big fancy truck at your event, and they're going to have a 20% discount for anyone that, you know, likes their page or something like that. So always thinking about how that post is giving value to your audience so that you don't just annoy them with, you know, all this content promoting sponsors. And I guess the final thing I'll say as well on that is timing. So you asked about timing. Should we do one a week, a few a week? How do we do it? However you do it, spread it out, because you want it to be part of a content plan where it's evenly balanced. So you're not just going, oh no, we've only got a couple of weeks left, let's just, you know, put out 3 posts a day on our sponsors, because that's just going to once again frustrate your audience. So spread it out as much as you can. The other thing to keep in mind with this is typically your social media channels for your event are going to be more active during your event. So you know what happens is you see, if you look at your analytics for social media, usually you'll have, you know, it kind of starts to spike as your event comes up, and then during your event, you have this spike in your social media, and for a few days after, you have a bit of a peak as well, because people are naturally then looking up your social media pages during the event. They're posting about the event, so your engagement levels are really high during the event and maybe a week either side of your event, just as an example. So keep that in mind, because when you're doing sponsor posts, you want to make sure that your sponsors are getting the most exposure possible. And a lot of the time on Facebook, our stuff that we post is just goes into Facebook land and hardly anyone sees it. So we want to do it when our engagement levels are high. So if you've got some, you know, top sponsors that are contributing good cash contribution to your event, then perhaps you want to have that discussion with them and say, hey, we're actually going to do your posts around the time of our event or either side of our event, because our analytics show that that's when we're getting our peak engagement. So that was a very long-winded response, but as you can see, there's a few things to consider there. And I guess it really shows as well that sponsorship and this whole partnership arrangement with a corporate needs to be very well thought out. And therefore, that's why, you know, targeting the right sponsors with the right package is so important. Like I can't say that enough, because I know I've been there where we've wasted so much time on sponsors that really don't add a lot of value. You know, sponsors that just waste your time. And I mean that with most respect, but you need to be quite strategic in how you approach your sponsors and what that package looks like to get your outcomes. And you need to understand that you've got value to offer sponsors as well. Sometimes events think that they're like this to their sponsors, you know, it's a partnership. So if you have a good partnership arrangement, that sponsor's gaining the same, if not more, from your event than you're getting from them. So don't feel like you have to be at their beck and call. Right. We're doing pretty good with time. What I want to talk about now is this next step. So basically we've looked at what is it that we can offer sponsors. If we're thinking through the process I've just talked through with you, right now you have a good appreciation of all of your assets and what it is of value that you can offer potential sponsors. So now you need to get really clear on who are the appropriate prospects. Or another way to say it is you need to develop your hit list. So this is really about identifying who your corporate sponsors could and should be. And what you need to remember there is not every sponsor will be a good fit for your event. And that's an interesting comment because often we go, if anyone offers a sponsorship, we're like, yeah, woohoo, you know, how exciting. But you need to be mindful that not every sponsor will be a good fit. You need to think about your values, you know, your community's values, your brand, and make sure that sponsor is a good fit. And there's an example of a bad fit. A resource company approached a small food festival to sponsor a small food festival. Some members of that committee were like, yay, we've got, you know, a big sponsor coming on board. They've approached us. They were excited at this committee meeting. It actually clashed with the values of some of the community members because they didn't want to support a resource company in their small agricultural community. And what happened is they actually lost some of their really committed volunteers as a result of that. They didn't end up taking on the resource company anyway, but what it did is it created even the consideration of taking them on created this divide within the volunteers. It wasn't an alignment to the values. Unfortunately, they lost volunteers. So remember, not every sponsor is a good fit for your event. So what you need to do now in terms of identifying your prospects is you take that inventory list that you created, you take your attendee profiles that you created last week, and you ask yourself, what companies want to hear about these opportunities and what companies want to engage with our attendees? So this is where you're starting to match it up. And that's how you save time and energy. So you need to think about who is the right fit for our event. And then you've got to develop a database of all of those potential sponsors. So you're lining it up with your assets, you're lining it up with your attendees, and you start to identify what I call your hit list of potential sponsors. So you start to collate the details of their names, their contacts, all of their details in a database. And as you're doing that, you start to think about what kind of level would I be pitching to these potential sponsors? Are they a $500 sponsor? Are they a $50,000 sponsor? We wish. So that becomes what I refer to as your sponsorship hit list. So it's just compiling all of the contacts of potential sponsors, but not just any business. Like I said, the first thing is to make sure they're a match. So you need to do some homework. You can look at your competitors and see who they're working with. You can also ask attendees for sponsor suggestions or get a feel for the types of brands and businesses that your attendees are aligned to. Look at what types of cars are in the car park. Is there a particular car brand that everyone's driving or a lot of people are driving? So start to really kind of think it through. Then finally, once you've got your list of prospects, you need to then research them. And this is a time-consuming part, but once again, once you've done this, then you've got that information. It's going to help you have a better chance of success in your pitching. So you want to actually just Google them. So you just jump on, you know, ABC company and just read. Usually they've got, you know, a community section, or sometimes they'll have a sponsorship section, or just read about us and learn a bit about that organisation. What are their goals? Whose is their audience? Nothing impresses a sponsor more than showing them that you've done your research and coming to them with a solid pitch. They're so used to just receiving hundreds and hundreds of generic proposals every week. If you can show them that you've done your research, you know how your event aligns with their organisation and their goals, I guarantee you, you are going to be on the top of their list. But it takes time. So let's discuss that a little bit more. What are some of the things that sponsors may want to achieve from your event? So when you're doing that research on your prospective sponsors, or when you're having discussions with corporates, these are some of the things you want to be looking out for. Sponsors are ultimately looking to connect with your attendees, but they also want things like increased brand loyalty. They want to, you know, reinforce their image or establish an image amongst your audience. Increase sales, they want to launch a new product. That's often a good one. If they want to launch a new product or service to a new market, brand building, and just on that launch a new product, just to give you a practical example there, when we were working on this international sporting event, at that time we had, doing our research, we identified a car brand that was actually launching a new SUV. And they needed to try to jump into the market and compete with the likes of Toyota and Isuzu, etc. So we presented them with an opportunity to actually launch. It was, all the timing was perfect. We presented them with the opportunity to launch their new model at our event, which was a perfect rural audience for them. They didn't take it actually, which was really disappointing, but it was their loss. But that's just an example of where you do your research and you start to find these things out and you go, oh, we could offer something to them that's going to help them achieve that. And sometimes it's just one thing. It's one thing that you may find that you can pitch to that sponsor that gets them, and then the conversation starts. So you need to know what the sponsor wants to achieve, and you do that through research. Now you've got to find the perfect match. So you've got all your information, right? I know that sounds like a really big process, but once you start, I promise you it's not, and you don't have to do that every year. Basically, the point you're in now is the point of matchmaking. So this part is the most critical part, and if you get it right, it will save you so much time. It'll save you so much time pitching. It'll save you so much heartache getting knocked back from inappropriate sponsors. And that never feels good. So what we're trying to do is to improve our odds. So basically where we're at, we understand what our event can offer. So we know the benefits, we know our assets, we understand what we can offer a prospective sponsor. We also have identified who those prospective sponsors are, and we understand what they want to achieve. basically then you are identifying your perfect match that you want to start pitching to. I'm a really firm believer that when you have a good asset list and a well-defined audience, your ideal sponsor will appear on their own. I know you're probably thinking, Linda, you're dreaming, but it often happens. It's like you do that work, you know what you're looking for, you're much clearer on the type of sponsor that is right for your event. You start having a few conversations and they just appear. Magic, maybe. So who already knows who their perfect match is? Has anyone been through that process? Have you got a sense of who would be the right fit for your event? Or do you think going through that process will give you that clarity of who you should be targeting for your event? Okay, now's the fun part. So we've got our perfect match. We know this is XYZ sponsor and this is the package we're going to pitch to them. Now it's about doing the pitching. And like I've said a few times now, I'm not a big fan of the generic approach. In some cases for lower level sponsors, it can work. But today, what I suggest, particularly when it's so competitive to secure sponsors, is that you take a very targeted and personalised approach. So what I often do is I use a bit of a tiered approach. So I usually set a bit of a value. So I'll go, okay, my tier 1 and 2, that's anyone over $10,000 cash. So my tier 1 and 2s, I do a customized, very personalized approach. And for anyone that's tier 3 or that is providing in kind, I measure how much time and effort I put in based on the value. And this all comes back to knowing that you can spend way too long on this process. So you need to set yourself some boundaries. How much time will I spend on this? Okay, so first you need to do your research. So if a business does state on their website what their needs and requirements are, what their goals are, then you need to follow them. For example, I know for a fact that if you want to pitch to somebody like Toyota, they clearly stipulate on their website the process to go through. So do your research, have a look. So if you've identified that Toyota is a potential sponsor, you need to go to their website. It'll tell you exactly how to go through the process. For any others, just do some research and understand what their objectives are and what some key messages are for your pitch. You also need to understand who to pitch to. So even the best designed, best researched, best price proposal won't work if you send it to the wrong person. And that can be very frustrating. So who should you send it to? Typically, you're looking for people that are either in branding or marketing, or some larger companies have a sponsorship department, somebody that works in business development or communications. Them kind of roles, those kind of roles are going to be the ones that would typically look after sponsorship. So find out who the best person is to send it to before you send it. I always suggest that you call before sending a proposal. So don't send a proposal cold. And particularly for major sponsorships, if it's possible, have a face-to-face meeting with the appropriate person. Develop a customized proposal. So develop that presentation or a quick pitch that summarizes the objectives of your event and what you can offer the business. So always have, you may not always have the opportunity to give that pitch with a hard copy document, but know what your key points are. So if you have the opportunity to get in front of the right person at Toyota, for example, then you want to know what are the key messages that's going to grab their attention. You need to follow up and expect to do that multiple times. And this is the thing, it can be very time consuming. But once you've sent them a proposal, give them a few days to sit on it. Then get in touch with them. And expect, as I said, to follow them up multiple times. If they're a major sponsor and you're asking for large cash amounts, then leave yourself enough time for long periods of negotiation. That can take 3, 6 or more months to actually come up with an agreement. Another thing I just wanted to mention as well is it's important that you secure any major sponsorship commitments prior to commencing any of your marketing activity. Why do we do that? Because obviously one of the key things that sponsors want is that exposure through your marketing activity. So if you're halfway through your marketing activity for your event and then you secure a sponsor, they're only going to get value from that second half of your marketing activity. And sometimes that can come back and bite you. So I guess the message there is to start your sponsorship process early. In an ideal world, we want to have all of our sponsors locked away 3 to 4 months before the event, at least. Now, you need to manage your sponsors or your partners really well. And this is where a detailed sponsorship tracker can come in really handy to keep track of everything. I want you to also try to deliver more where you can. A few other things you may want to do is create a leverage kit for sponsors. What that is essentially a file of, you know, marketing material for your event, some photos or videos of your event. You might create them a specific email signature. So basically you're giving them some material that they can then use to promote their partnership with your event. And that's just a really good value add to sponsors. I also encourage you to add your sponsor's primary email contact to any newsletter, e-newsletter subscriptions that you have. So if you're sending out, you know, to potential attendees a newsletter every 6 months, for example, add your sponsor to that, because then they're going to see that activity happening. They want to know that you're promoting the event. They want to see that activity. You want to also make sure you allow time for regular phone, face-to-face where possible, and email contact directly with your sponsors. So one-on-one, not just sending them group updates. Looking after the sponsors at the event. Look, most events do this really well. So having a hospitality area, catering, taking the time to go and spend time with your sponsors at the event. Really important, because what we want to remember is it's so much easier to re-sign a sponsor than to get a new sponsor. So always keep that in mind by the time you're at this stage. Always share any, so if you've used their logo anywhere, you've done a social media post about them, take a screenshot of it and share it with them. And also make sure you have some time post-event to have a really good debrief meeting with them to find out from them what worked at the event, what worked with the sponsorship, what could we do next time. It's an opportunity to try to re-sign them on the spot. Now, once the sponsorship money arrives in the bank, a lot of people think it's time to kick back and relax. No, that's not the case. I estimate that getting the commitment from a sponsor is about 20% of the total work of sponsorship. In other words, now that you've got the sponsor locked away, you still have 80% of the work to do. Sponsorship is a transaction, and when sponsors don't get what they're paid for, they're often not very happy. So you have to deliver for your sponsors. Don't just think once you've got a sponsor, yeah, we've got our sponsor, and then we do put their logo in a few places and forget about them. You really need to look after your sponsors. But don't go overboard too much. You can sometimes do too much for them, and then you don't get that return. So you will know at what level and what commitment you need to give to that sponsor. Now, finally, reporting and accountability. As I just said before, renewing an existing relationship with a sponsor is much easier than trying to develop a new one. So as you can see, we've just been through the process of sourcing sponsorship. When it's done well, it's actually quite a lengthy process. So if you can actually renew existing sponsors, oh my God, it's the best. And what I suggest you also try to do is when you lock away a new sponsor, try to lock them in for multiple years. All right, so what do we need to do post-event? You want to have a debrief meeting, or some people call it an exit interview, as I've just said. You can do that by phone or survey, and once again, that depends on the level of sponsor. If it's a higher level sponsor, a naming rights sponsor, then you want to have a face-to-face meeting with them. You need to send through a letter of thanks and also include a copy of any post-event report. If you've got any media clippings, anything that showcases the success of your event, even if you've made a video, you know, often at the end of an event, events will have a little, you know, video which has got just some clips from the event. Send that through to them as well. Share with them the success that you've had. This is also the opportunity to review the arrangement and to see if there's any interest for them to participate in future years. And if you can sign it off at that point, then that is excellent. So always making sure you're reporting, be accountable to your sponsors. They want to know your success. They want to know what their return has been as well. So share with them, you know, a bit of a report that shows the success of the event and also all of the exposure and work that you've done for that specific sponsor. This is all about trying to renew existing sponsors. And then the cycle just begins again. But as I said, if you've done that process as we've just been through, you don't obviously have to do that every year. You've already got that, but then you're just reviewing, updating your sponsorship prospect and perhaps, you know, reigniting some conversations that you've had in previous years to try to get another sponsor over the line. That's sponsorship. Good luck. And there will be instances where a sponsor will just come to you. You know, if you do deliver a great event, you have, you know, a fantastic experience, you've got great success, you've got a lot of advocates out there talking about you, then there will be cases where a sponsor will just come to you, and that's a bonus. But if they do just come to you, don't get too excited and just take whatever they offer. Sit down and have a good conversation with them about what it is that they want to gain from the event, and then think about how you can actually also gain from that partnership as well to determine the best arrangement. Okay. Before we wrap up, I also just want to talk about grant funding. So in addition to corporate sponsorship, we're often looking for grant funding for our events as well. Grant funding is usually something that can be used to offset a bit of a cost, but more importantly, grant funding is usually used for you to do something more with your event. That more might be doing more marketing. It might be looking at a strategic plan. It might be building some infrastructure at your site. It might be giving you some money to have increased entertainment at your event. So you typically apply for a grant for some specific element of your event. One thing to be really mindful of is grants can be admin heavy. Not only do you have to apply for the grant, then there's certain reporting requirements. So always just be mindful of that. Don't just chase a grant for the sake of a grant, because sometimes it can become a burden. I'm actually dealing with an event on the Sunshine Coast at the moment that got some funding through Tourism and Events Queensland. And they're at the point where they just want to give it back because it's become too hard for them to manage. So make sure you're always seeing value in the grant and knowing, similar to what we talked about with sponsorship, knowing exactly what you need and want it for. So there are some current funding opportunities available for events. One of those is the Tourism and Events Queensland Destination Events Program. Some of you may have heard of this. It's called the QDEP program. There's single year funding for events that are looking to grow. So these are events that have specific tourism outcomes. You can't source this funding in your first year. You have to be at least in your second year, and you can seek up to $25,000 per year, depending on the size of your budget. So they actually determine the allocation of that grant based on your budget, because that determines really the size and scale of your event. As you can see, the rounds I've got on the screen for you, these funds are specifically to be used for things like marketing, strategic plan development, engagement of short-term personnel, and the hire of temporary infrastructure. So Tourism and Events Queensland is really about trying to support the future sustainability or viability of events. So they're looking at how they can set events up for future success. So that's why there's things like strategic plan development included. It's quite a straightforward grant to apply for. It's not a very complex application process, but once again, make sure that you're only applying for it if you have a real need in those particular areas and you're going to get that return. So it's a fairly long URL, but you can just search for Queensland Destination Events Program and it will come up for you online, and it's got all of the details and the guidelines. Another one that's open right now is the Building Better Regions Fund. Now, you must be a non-profit or council to apply for this one. You can apply for up to $20,000 unmatched. Otherwise, if you think you can match anything over $20,000, you can actually apply for up to $1 million. Now, this one is for significantly expanded events or first year new events. So if you're adding a new element to your event, you will be able to apply for this $20,000 unmatched. If you're a new event, so never been held before, you could apply for $20,000 unmatched to help cover the cost of running your event. Now, this one is much more comprehensive in terms of the application process, and it does close on the 5th of March. So time is running out for this one, and I suggest if anyone is interested in that for their event that they jump on it today and have a look. Once again, it's a long URL, so I haven't put it on the screen, but if you just search Building Better Regions Fund, you'll find it, and it's in the community stream. So you can see there are two very good funding programs that are available right now. And you can also do some of your own work finding other funding opportunities and keeping your finger on the pulse. So if you know that you want to build a new toilet block, or you want to invest in increased marketing, or you want to employ a short-term contractor to help deliver your event, for example, if you know what these things are, you can do a bit of searching and you might be able to find a grant that can help with that. Now, the RDA Darling Downs and Southwest is an excellent resource. So if you're not yet signed up for their newsletter, I recommend that you do. They send out a great update of grants that are open on a regular basis. So make sure you jump in and sign up to their newsletter. And if, like I said before, if you've got something with your event that you know you want or need grant funding for, give them a call or give council a call and just say, look, we want to build a new toilet block or a new stage or whatever it may be. Any thoughts on any funding that may be available or suitable for that? It's also good to sign up for industry newsletters. So Tourism and Events Queensland or even Outback Queensland Tourism, they often send out newsletters and that has updates on what funding opportunities currently exist. There's Grant Connect and Community Grants. They're good online resources. The Funding Centre for Nonprofits and also Foundation for Rural Regional Renewal, as some of you may know as FRRR. They often have really good little programs, and they're good because, you know, any rural communities that are drought affected or flooding or bushfires or anything around building resilience in rural communities, you can often tap into some funding there to assist with events as well. So there's quite a few different funding opportunities. And also in addition to that, if you're looking at, you know, an arts-based event or a sporting-based event, there's also other channels, whether that be, you know, art-specific funding or even sports-based funding. And obviously you also have a local funding opportunity. So everybody should be aware of this, the Tourism Events Grant. And this provides funding across 3 categories. So as you can see there on the screen, and I'm sure most of you are aware of this, but you've got an option to secure 2,000, 3,000 or 6,000. And that is available for existing events or developing new events, which is really exciting because not a lot of councils or government agencies will actually fund new events. So it's a really good, I guess, channel for you to actually get some seed funding if you are a new event. So all the details for that are on the website. And also if your event doesn't qualify as a tourism event, because we know there's often from a funding perspective, there's always 2 different categories. You've got tourism events, so any events that actually attract external visitors, or you've got community events, and they're events that are more focused on local residents or building community pride or community initiatives. So my understanding is council also has a community grants program for anybody that may not be eligible for the tourism events grant. Now, my final slide before I hand over for any questions. There's a number of things you should consider when you're applying for grants. Once again, this can be, or grant applications can be quite an onerous process. So making sure that you take the time to identify the right grant is really important, because we don't want to waste our time applying for something we're not actually eligible for. And I know that sounds silly, but I've seen it happen a number of times. So call the funding body prior to commencing your application, because you can read the criteria or the guidelines and think, yep, okay, I think we're right. But sometimes they can be a little bit confusing when you read them. So I suggest you call the funding body and just say to them, this is our project, this is what we want to do. Do you think we are eligible? What that also does is make you top of mind for that funding body. So they already know that something's going to come in from you. Now read the instructions and the criteria thoroughly and multiply that by 2. And that's because of what I was just saying. You do not want to waste your time applying for something you're not eligible for. Write the questions and answers in a Word document. So anyone that's applied for a grant recently will know that a lot of grants are now applied for through an online platform. So you're typing your response straight into the website. They're pretty good these days, but I have certainly had cases where I've lost a whole grant application because that online platform has done something and just lost all my information. So now I don't trust them. And I always suggest to people, write the questions and answers in a Word document, and you can easily just copy and paste that in once you're finished and happy with it. Now, point 4 may seem really stupid, and you're probably thinking, Linda's just lost the plot now. Answer the question. It does seem silly, but I've also assessed some grant applications before, and you can tell when somebody is really just fluffing around in their response. I'd rather people use dot points, get straight to the point and answer the question. Don't fluff around. It's always good to ask someone separate to the project or to the event to read your submission before you submit it. That whole thing of fresh eyes can really help. And even sometimes the funding body will provide a service where they will actually review your application and give feedback before you submit it. If those opportunities are offered, I absolutely suggest you take them up because it's going to place you ahead of the rest. And make sure you also take advantage of any webinars. So sometimes funding bodies will also host a webinar on how to apply, and they are jam-packed with tips on what to include in your response. Make sure you get the budget right, because that's often the first thing the funders will look at. Always include credible letters of support, and if you can, include visuals. So if you've got photos, if you've got site plans, anything that's backing up your case is really helpful. And they're just a few things that I've learned over the years of doing grant applications that can really help and put you ahead of competition, because applying for funding is a really competitive space. Everybody wants that bucket of money. Do you think that's enough today? I really do apologise if I've overwhelmed you. I know that's a lot of information, but it's really important that I covered off initially on that bigger picture around budgeting and finance for events. It's giving some context. Sponsorship and grants are critical to the success of a lot of events, but you don't have to be dependent on it. And I challenge you as an event to actually do that task of removing sponsorship and grants from your actual budget, your revenue from your budget, and see what impact that has on your bottom line. I don't suggest that you'll be able to survive without any sponsorship or grants, but we do want to start to reduce that, and I want to start to challenge you to look at other revenue streams, because that's going to set you up for a better chance of success into the future. And then you need to do that strategic process of knowing what sponsorship you need and what grant funding you need, and be really targeted with it. Please don't waste your time. It can become a real maze of work that you don't need to get bogged down in. So be very strategic, know what you want, know who the best fit is, and go out and get it. Sounds simple, right? Now, I'm very conscious that that was a very heavy masterclass. There was a lot of information in there. You will have received this morning 2 documents from Kim. One of those is a sponsorship toolkit and the other one is a grants toolkit. That information will help support what I've talked to you about today, and also give you some more practical tips on that successful approach to grants and sponsorship. So make sure you have a look at that. Use it. If you've got any questions, guys, please pop it into the Facebook event. I'm looking at that on a daily basis. So use it. If you need any help in other areas, make sure you put it in there, and I'd be happy to assist where I can. Otherwise, if anybody has anything they'd like to say right now, I'm happy to stay on the line for a little bit longer to answer any questions that you have.
Thanks, Linda. It was mind-boggling what you've told us, but it would be interesting to go back and sit down and relook at my notes and read the handout. And there's a lot that I can see we can improve on just as one group. So, yeah.
And you know what, even if it's just, and this is important as well, even if it's just something really little that you take away from these sessions, you know, there's lots of information, but if you take away 1 or 2 little things that's going to improve your processes and give you a better chance of success, then that's a win.
Yeah.
So good luck.
Thank you.
Everyone go have a cup of tea. Have a lovely afternoon, and I'll see everybody next week.
See you all next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.